Hi, this is Little Dwarf playing games while rambling incoherently into a microphone. Why? Well, just because I can, and I continue with Strangeland. Last time I finished the game blind, and I didn't really get it. So I am going to play again with the annotation mode and the commentary from the developers. Hopefully they can explain to me what the hell did they mean by this game. So let's start again.
I've got nothing more to say to you.
Hi, I'm Mark Yohalam, and I'm one of the 3 developers at Wormwood Studios. My core area of responsibility is the story, dialogue, and design of our adventure games. And in these commentary tracks, I'm going to talk about that. And in particular, I'm going to talk about the life experiences and literary influences and game influences that helped shape Strangeland and give it its content. I apologize in advance, it's pretty long-winded, so feel free to skip mine and listen to James and Vic's if you're in for something a little more brief.
Hello there. My name is James Panos. I'm the programmer of Strangeland and 1/3 of Wormwood Studios. I was brought into what was gonna be a small game for a jam and has ended up a fully fledged game that has taken almost 4 years in production. Joining the production, my initial goal was to make sure that this time we have the proper tools to create the vision Mark Yohalam and Victor Flagg had with this project. In a sense, I feel like a big part of Strangeland has been pushed through the finishing line because I didn't refuse any of the things that were vitally needed by this artistic creation. I'll be going through details further on. Hope you enjoy.
Okay, that's very nice that the developer's commentary is even narrated. So
There's a particular kind of allegorical story in which the protagonist's mental state, his character flaws, his hopes and aspirations, his sins, are manifested in a fantastical landscape through which that character travels, and over the course of his travels maybe comes to understand what's going on inside his mind or his soul. The first of these that I read as a child is Where the Wild Things Are. It's not as obviously an allegorical story as others, but it is. It's about a child's will to power and anger and frustration, sense of injustice, about how he's been treated by his mother. And those things become embodied in this land of monsters over which he becomes king before finally returning home, maybe having found a little bit more appreciation for home and the comforts of home and the manners of human society. And then over the years, I read other ones. There's the fantasy series, The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. That's sort of a lowbrow one. In the highbrow department, there's Pilgrim's Progress, and of course, The Divine Comedy by Dante. And all of these works are an important inspiration for the structure and content of Strangeland. The Inferno begins with this memorable stanza: midway in the journey of our life, I came to myself in a dark wood, for the straight way was lost. Ah, how hard it is to tell the nature of that wood, savage, dense, and harsh. The very thought of it renews my fear. It is so bitter, death is hardly more. And from there, of course, Dante begins navigating an even more terrifying environment going through first hell and then purgatory and ending up in heaven. And that kind of structure was something that we wanted to explore with Strangeland. You similarly traverse different environments. There's a verticality to them, similar to in Dante's poems, and a similar sense of growing self-awareness on the part of the stranger, who's really a manifestation of this widower who's lost his wife to cancer, and he's coming to terms with his inability to save her, and his powerlessness, and his grief, and the emptiness in his life from having lost her, and his doubts about the decisions that he made over the course of that life, the compromises and the sacrifices, and whether any of that made sense, if it's going to end with him alone without the woman he loves. And that agony and indecision is manifested in this carnival, and ultimately in a shadowy version of the carnival called Deadland that you'll get to later in the game. And so, I just want to say, I understand Tolkien, for example, criticized allegory maybe a little bit insincerely, given that he has his characters traversing things like the dead marshes to get to Mount Doom. Feels a little bit Pilgrim's Progress-y. But I think there is a place for allegory. There's a reason why human beings keep coming back to allegorical stories, not just because they teach values, but because they teach us symbols to look at the struggles that we have in our own lives. Hopefully we won't all have to go through hell and exile like Dante did, but we all go through little hells and little exiles, and I think allegory helps us understand what we're going through.
Okay, so I guess at the very least I did guess correctly that the protagonist has lost his wife to cancer, but I still don't get why he, why did he feel so intensely guilty about that? Because there is a difference between feeling sad and between feeling guilty. Guilt implies that it was your fault somehow.
AGS stands for Adventure Game Studio, which is Strangeland's game engine. This was incidentally the engine we previously used for Primordia, and What Jedi Games has also predominantly used AGS for all their games. The big difference this time, however, is that we've expanded parts of AGS and fixed many of its issues throughout the production of Strangeland. Accessing backend factions through the plugin extension of the engine allowed us to run code functions that weren't accessible or were very slow. This has been a wonderful learning experience for me personally. The result stands tall and is not plagued by the selection of the engine in such an extent that people can't believe this was made in AGS.
Okay, I didn't really get most of that. That's because I'm not a programmer, I guess.
Wait! Goodbye, my love. She's gone.
Not gone, Clarent. Nearly dead. Again and again she comes to this well, to weep and leap at the sound of the shriek. Which of you will save the other?
Is the annotation mode on? It is. Okay.
Hello? Hello? I guess I need to put in a quarter. Hello?
Sticks and stones will make me groan, but words will never move me. Sticks and stones will make me groan.
Yeah, I've heard it before.
Listen, the thing you have to understand is, this is all your fault. You miss all the obvious signs. You let everything slip through your fingers. And you're no good at fixing things.
These three things which the stranger is said to lack are the core skills of the adventure gaming: identifying hotspots, acquiring and carrying items, and solving puzzles. Yeah, I'm definitely bad at all three, so I do concur.
That's why she's dead. That's why you're here. Right. Anyway, I'll call again later. But if you need help, and you will need help, please hang up and press 0 to dial your operator.
A customary script for payphones in the United States directed the user in need of assistance to press 0 to speak to an operator. Your operator here carries a double entendre, as the stranger's interlocutor plays a superego role to the stranger as ego, in a sense, operating on or through the stranger.
Wait! He sounded just like me.
For me, all storytelling is autobiographical. I don't really have the capacity to imagine characters that aren't, in a sense, just manifestations of my own qualities, my own defects, my own fears, and doubts and aspirations. To some extent, I can model characters based on people I've met in my life, but even then, it's really the characters in the game are just reflections of the significance to me of people in my own life. And so that's also a form of autobiography. So the agonies and doubts that the stranger has in Strangeland aren't inventions. I wouldn't be capable of inventing things like this. Hopefully not everyone has a superego, which is what we call this antagonist who calls you on the phone. Not everyone, I hope, has a superego who calls inside their head and belittles them and makes them question everything that they've done, makes them feel guilty for everything bad that's happened around them. But I think some of us do. And while the stranger's superego is maybe an exaggeration of the voice that rings me up inside my own head, there is that ringing. And, part of the reason why I like to have these autobiographical stories is to think through my own experiences, to reach to players who might have similar experiences and say, look, those aren't just things that happen to you. Those aren't just challenges that you face. I think that's something that literature can really do for us, games can do for us, any kind of storytelling can do for us, is make us realize that we aren't alone in the feelings that we've had. And, I think the consequence of dwelling on these doubts and insecurities and fears in Strangeland is that it does make it a dark and a horrific game. But, I think it's also a hopeful game. And even if it's melancholy, I don't think it's a depressing game, because ultimately it's about how the stranger works through these various voices and monsters inside of him and finds his way back into a life that he can live with.
So I guess in essence, this is a game about overcoming depression and grief. Like, he was consumed by grief over the death of his wife, and I guess in that happy ending, when he flies towards the light, it represents him, finding will to live, finding something worthwhile to carry on. I am going to jump and kill myself so that I can get to the beginning, because there was a comment.
It's a long way down, but I could give it a shot.
There was a commentary node there, as well as the rocks that I'm going to need.
Okay, so when I came into doing the graphics for Strangeland, I had Dark Seed and Dark Seed 2 very much in the forefront of my mind, like artistically, I guess. Don't think anyone would call those the most artistic games ever, except for the contributions of the seminal HR Giga, of course. And yeah, so basically my idea was for Strangeland was to give it a bit of a Giga vibe, or a Giga vibe, however you want to pronounce it. And honestly, kind of, I was trying to make a lot of the game look like the cover for Dark Seed 1, which turned out not to be the best idea when the scope of the game got kind of increased pretty massively from what we initially visualized. So I kind of had to expand my ideas for that a bit, which was fun though, because initially I started with basically a very blank canvas, monochrome brush strokes, like the underpainting for an oil painting, where you'd blotch in, simple tones and shapes, and then I got to come in later and add a lot of the visual flair and choose some more varied color palettes and stuff like that, which is when the purple and yellow kind of contrasting colors came in, and I pretty much stuck with that throughout. I wanted Strangeland to have a dreamlike quality, and while I've always wanted to make like a black and white game, that's just wasn't really ready to do that yet. So it's a game with two colors, if anything. I quite liked the idea early on of doing a psychological horror game that didn't actually depict any blood in it per se. I just kind of stumbled into that by accident, really. I mean, I hadn't drawn any blood in any of the scenes 3/4 through production, and then I'm like, well, we kind of need blood here, but I've got a workaround for that. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I just thought it'd be interesting to have a horror game with no blood and see how fracking scary we could make a horror game without, jump scares and blood pools and raining blood and blood this, blood that everywhere. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'll talk.
So, who or what are you?
I just am. Because I think.
The Raven is inverting the famous foundational belief offered by René Descartes, cogito ergo sum. This inversion was previously made by Jean-Paul Sartre in his novel Nausea, because the two ravens in Strangeland allude to the two ravens belonging to Odin in Norse mythology, Hugin, thought, and Munin, memory, and the raven is Hugin. The line can be also understood as simply, I am thought. Okay, I still don't know why Norse mythology specifically, but I guess the developers are probably going to tell me.
Really? What are you?
A raven, lunatic.
I.e. a raving lunatic. The raven frequently plays with near homophones.
Where are we?
Baked in a pie, I'd guess.
In the nursery rhyme Sing a Song of Sixpence, there are 24 black birds baked in a pie. Despite the raven's insistence on being distinguished from a crow, she apparently cannot pass up this allusion.
Do you just sit there, watching every time that woman kills herself?
Aw, don't get so bent out of shape. That little slip and fall didn't do her any harm.
But she killed herself.
Don't take it so literally, boss. Believe me, if she were dead, I'd be eating her eyes. As you might have noticed, death is different here. Puts a poor raven out of work, I'll tell you that.
Are you sure you're not a crow?
Look, I may be unkind, but I'm not murderous.
The Victorian poetic collective noun for ravens is an unkindness. For crows, it is a murder. The two following lines also distinguish between the two species based on their calls and socializing.
And I croak rather than caw. Plus, I fly in a pair, not in a flock.
Ravens do travel in pairs. The most famous such pair are the two servants of the Norse god Odin, Hugin, Thought, and Munin, Memory. Strangeland's two ravens parallel Odin's Thought. Thought waits by the well, and Memory by the yew tree.
Raven. Definitely Raven.
What did you mean? Death is different here.
It means I'll not carry in comfort down there, feast on thee.
The Raven is paraphrasing the opening line of Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem Carrion Comfort, which begins, I'll not carrion comfort, despair, not feast on thee. Literally, the Raven can't feast on the stranger, because the stranger cannot die, but the Raven is also alluding to the stranger's consuming despair.
Goodbye.
One of the first things that I coded was the implementation of the SDL audio engine, SDL mixer, with AGS. SDL is a cross-platform audio library that allows the playing of multiple sound effects, positional audio, and various effects applied to them. Music tracks are streamed using the OGG Vorbis audio library, which enables Strangeland to crossfade between two tracks, something that was necessary and appropriate early on to our production. Sound effects, on the other hand, are loaded temporarily in memory when played and removed after a short period of time to make sure that we don't clog the user's memory. One of the hardest things accomplished here, and one of the main reasons we switched from AGS default sound engine, was the need to apply a low-pass filter audibly present when you open the inventory screen.
Again, I didn't really get most of that.
The hole's just big enough to reach through. We got it. Sure is heavier than it looked.
Adventure games are commonly described as being about locks and keys. The player comes across locks that can take any number of forms. It could be a character, it could be a literal lock, it could be a chasm that you have to get across, and various keys. They could be a literal key to unlock a door. It could be an item that a character wants. It could be a rope that lets you cross the chasm, and so forth. In Primordia, our locks and keys really wound up being quite literally a lot of locked doors that you had to unlock. You would enter a room, and before you could go farther in the direction that you wanted to go, you'd have to unlock a door, and you'd unlock that door and walk forward, and you'd hit another locked door. You'd have to find the key to that, you'd unlock it, you'd walk forward, and you'd hit another locked door. We sort of lampshaded that and made fun of it a bit in Primordia, but even with the lampshading and humor, I think it interfered with the flow of the game. And so with Strangeland, we wanted to shift away from a locked door model towards a locked box model. And the difference there is that a locked box is something the player can walk past, something he can walk around, and come back to from different angles, literally. Whereas a door sort of openly obstructs your progress. So with Strangeland, it was important that the hub area be pretty open. The well has exits going in all directions. You can then take exits from those areas without hitting locked doors. And while we do still have some locked doors in the game, I think we did a better job of permitting the player to wander around and come across these boxes he wants to open, rather than finding himself locked out of areas that he wants to enter. Although, candidly, I think we fell back on the crutch. I fell back on the crutch of locked doors in designing the game, particularly as it went on. In the Hall of Mirrors, for instance, there's a long series of locked doors. It's a hard design crutch to get around, and hopefully on our third game, maybe I can find a better approach than we used here.
Now, atmosphere-wise, I had a few things in the back of my mind, trying to set up the atmosphere for Strangeland, which, I mean, not only encompasses art, but also soundscape design, music. I guess you could say Sanitarium was a big one that influenced me there. Weird Dreams, definitely. Commodore 64 classic, definitely a big influence. You'll see a few little Easter eggs and bits and pieces from those games. Strangely, my kind of biggest atmospheric influence, I think, on Strangeland was the game Kyrandia and Kyrandia 2: Hand of Fate. I guess they're just games I really loved as a kid, and I felt kind of drawn into the world, and I felt it was kind of like an insular world. I mean, Kyrandia 1 obviously set on an island, basically, and I wanted the park of Strangeland to have that same kind of feeling, like you really were exploring an interesting, varied, wondrous kind of landscape, but obviously a lot darker than Kyrandia in a lot of spots. Yeah. You will actually see a couple of scenes and visual motifs lifted directly from Kyrandia. I like to think they're just my little nods to the game. I don't feel like I was, plagiarizing Kyrandia in any way. Just in case anyone wants to accuse me of that, you bastards.
Okay. Let's continue.
Who's there? Did you scare off those nice doves? Come closer. Let me hear you.
A large crow.
Raven. Cytotoxic.
The raven, representing memory, as in Odin's raven Munin, is providing words associated with memories the scribe would like to forget. The scribe himself is a reflection of the stranger, and is trying to shed painful recollections of the woman and her death to cancer. Many of the words relate to apparently pleasant memory, for example, anniversary or champagne, while others relate more specifically to cancer. Chemotherapy involves using a cytotoxic chemical, that is, chemicals that are so toxic to cells. Because cancer cells divide more frequently, they can be more susceptible to certain forms of cytotoxicity. Okay.
It's a you.
Ahem. It is the you.
It's an empty bird bath.
It had water once, but the deeper he drinks, the dimmer grows the mind of many a man.
Liam Hollander's translation of Havamal, stanza 12. The suggestion is that the scribe, or perhaps the stranger, has drunk all of the water of wisdom, but it has only made him less wise. This foreshadowed the stranger scribe's later invocation of Ecclesiastes 1:18. In much wisdom is much grief. The original Havamal refers not to a darkening of the mind in the sense of grief, but is giving the more direct advice not to get drunk. Okay, interesting.
There's nothing on them but nonsense.
Poe.
Edgar Allan Poe, the author of The Raven, among other works. The suggestion is that his work is thematic not only to Strangeland as a game, but also to the stranger's own personal experience. Okay.
A noose. I wonder how it got there.
You were the one who tied it there. Tried hanging yourself. Did it make you any wiser?
The scribe alludes to the myth of Odin hanging himself from Yggdrasil, a sacrifice of himself to himself, from which Odin gained knowledge of the runes.
I'm not sure. I don't remember.
That's why I write things down, you know. So as not to remember.
Don't you mean to forget?
Yes, I do mean to forget.
Kyrandia.
Kyrandia. Westwood. So yeah, Kyrandia, just strangely a big influence on my art style for Strangeland. I feel like I consciously drawn inspiration from Kyrandia. I guess, I don't know, I guess it's just the open world feel that Kyrandia always had for me. And I wanted to bring that into our project, into the horror kind of world. And this screen would be a pretty good example of that. If you look really closely to the branches of the yew tree, it matches exactly the branch structure of the oldest living tree in Kyrandia. And actually, the old man under the tree and the bench, I used that as a basis for painting the scribe and his resting place in Strangeland. I just want to give a few little nods to that game. Not that it had any massive tangible influence, really, but it's just always in the back of my mind. Like, Primordia, heavily influenced by Beneath the Steel Sky. But Strangeland, I'm a little bit more on board for art and music, and less so like ideas and world directing than I was on Primordia. Strangeland being Mark's brainchild, and Primordia being a little bit more of my initial, conception or concept or whatever. So yeah, I guess there's less actual game influences of mine in Strangeland and on my work in Strangeland than there was in Primordia, definitely. But yeah, Kyrandia just always in the background with its natural bridges or unnatural bridges, as the case may be.
Shortly after we finished Primordia, I set about trying to make this role-playing game, which I've now been working on for about a decade, called Fallen Gods. And to construct the setting for it, I wanted to read all of the Icelandic sagas, all of the Norse mythology that I could get my hands on. It turns out it's taken me so long to make the game that now basically every third video game released this year is Norse inspired in one way or another, but maybe by the time Fallen Gods is done, the Norse craze will be over. But anyway, in the course of this omnivorous reading of Norse cultural artifacts, Icelandic cultural texts, I came across the Havamal. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, which is a poem of wisdom, like Ecclesiastes in the Hebrew Bible, attributed in some versions to being sayings of Odin, but they really don't read like the sayings of Odin any more than Ecclesiastes reads like the sayings of Yahweh. It's much more practical in the way even Ecclesiastes has a certain stoic, practical quality to it. But anyway, the Havamal is the text that the scribe quotes repeatedly when you talk to him. And I was really quite drawn in by it. I think, if anything, really solidified my commitment to build Fallen Gods. It was the alienness and familiarity at the same time of the wisdom in the Havamal, because it combines this mix of very practical advice, things like telling you not to get too drunk at a party, be careful if a tree's roots have come up, you want to be careful that it doesn't fall over on you, with other advice that's presented as just practical advice for a nightmarish world. Warnings about not letting yourself be seduced by witches whose houses you might seek comfort in a storm. Advice as to what to do if you meet the man who killed your brother while you're traveling on a road. That just suggests to me what a good time it is to be alive. For all the problems in the world right now, I don't need to worry about meeting the man who killed my brother on the road, or being lured into a witch's house. And then additionally, there's sort of more moral advice in it, similarly stoical advice to the advice in Ecclesiastes, or in some of the Roman writers, and then some what I would call spiritual advice. But all of it taken together conjures a world where the values were not so different from ours, but yet one that feels very, very strange. And I thought that that would be a sort of helpful text to use with the scribe, to make the scribe feel simultaneously cozy, friendly, familiar, but also with this alien quality to him that estranges you from him. And of course, estrangement is a major theme in Strangeland.
But he explained nothing about why specifically refer to the Norse mythology. Like, what significance does it hold for the protagonist? One of the longest recognized constellations is the crab Cancer, known as the Dark Sign because its stars are so dim. In Platonism, it is thought this constellation, through this constellation that souls descend from heaven to enter the body. Okay.
His eyes, they're gone.
Eyes and blindness are thematic throughout Strangeland, alluding to elements of mythology, for example Odin, folklore, the Snow Queen, religion, for example first cast the beam out of thy own eye, and literature. In the case of literature, one work referenced throughout Strangeland is T.S. Eliot's 1925 poem The Hollow Man, in which lost and empty men grope about in Death's twilight kingdom. The eyes are not here. There are no eyes here.
But my ears are just fine, stranger.
Who are you?
I'm afraid I don't rightly know. I'm just an old fool who can hardly remember what he's read, much less who he is. I do recall a book that said, each is his own judge.
Here and throughout, the scribe is quoting from the Havamal, a Norse book of wisdom attributed to Odin, akin to the Ecclesiastes. Odin won his wisdom in part by giving one of his eyes at Mimir's well, and by hanging himself from Yggdrasil, a giant yew known as the World Tree. The scribe has certain Odin-like qualities, including his missing eyes and the raven speaking to him. In this case, he quotes from a translation of the stanza 95.
That might just have to do.
Can't you just tell me who you are?
Seldom do those who are silent make mistakes.
Okay, so again from the Havamal.
So I think I'd best hold my tongue.
Can you at least tell me your name?
Well, I remember the name Fimbulfambi.
Fimbulfambi is Norse for monstrous fool. Okay, so Fimbul is not eternal, but rather monstrous or large? So I was wrong in that.
But whether it's mine, or yours, or both of ours, I can't quite say.
The stranger can initially identify either himself or the scribe with the Fool card as part of the Murmur's tarot reading. In fact, the scribe, like many other characters, is merely a distorted reflection of the stranger.
What are you writing?
The same things I've written 1,000 times before. After all, an act can lose meaning if you do it often enough.
Semantic satiation is a form of psychological state which can be induced by writing or saying a word over and over until it loses meaning. The words the scribe is writing are associated with the memories of the woman and her cancer.
Where are we?
I wish I could tell you. The man who stands at a strange threshold should be cautious before he crosses it.
That's from stanza 1 of the Havamal. In Mask of the Betrayer, another game about masks and the inability to reconcile oneself to his bereavement, that's an expansion for Neverwinter Nights, which I haven't played. The dead god Mirkul mockingly asks the protagonist, "Did you step through a portal without knowing where it led?" Later in his journey, the stranger must take a similar leap of faith.
I read that once, I think.
There was a golden-haired woman who threw herself down a well.
No sickness is worse to one who is wise than to lack the longed-for love.
Again from the Havamal.
But who was she?
Who are we to rob each other of our forgetfulness? After all, it's written somewhere that the learned man whose lore is deep is seldom happy at heart.
From the Havamal again.
Did you mention doves?
Yes, I feed them as they flutter by. I find it soothes my mind. Are they here?
Do you mean that crow?
Raven.
No, I mean the doves. It was the raven who told me of them. Are they here?
I think the raven lied.
Well, what difference does it make to a blind man?
About the doves.
Are they here?
Sure they're here.
Ah, then let me find a crust of bread.
A scrap of meat.
I'd rather think of it as bread for the doves.
This reverse transubstantiation, with meat serving for the bread, is suggestive of the scribe's alienation from God, faith and hope. Okay, that seems a little far-fetched, but sure. Sure, let me
I've got no use for them.
let me pretend I sort of see your point here.
What happened to your eyes?
I fed them to a raven.
Ravens prefer to eat eyes, tongues, and other soft tissue. The ravens of Strangeland remark on this predilection.
He said it would bring me wisdom.
In Norse mythology, Odin sacrifices one of his eyes for wisdom.
Did it work? Are you wiser?
Oh, yes, indeed. I learned that to be blind is better than to burn on a pyre.
Again from the Havamal.
And that it is easier to be rid of your eyes than the vision that offended you.
The scribe now alludes to the famous dictum of Matthew 5:29, "And if thy right eye offends thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell." The suggestion is that plucking out one's eye is insufficient to stop bad thoughts. Compare Mark 7:15. Nothing outside a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes out of the person that defiles them. The scribe is also referring to his own plight, and by the extension the stranger, blinding himself, has not gotten rid of the memory of the woman.
Why's that bird bath empty?
Once it was filled with fresh well water, as cool and clear as a sound mind.
The scribe is alluding to the Norse mythology and the waters of wisdom found beside Yggdrasil, such as the Mimir's well, from which Odin drank.
But doves and ravens would much rather bathe in dust.
The scribe is overstating his case. Ravens and doves do take dust baths, though both are happy enough with water baths as well.
Maybe they can't abide their reflections either.
The scribe's speculation hints that he plucked out his eyes, because what he could not bear to see was himself. Throughout the stranger's journey, it is repeatedly suggested that he cannot bear to look himself at the mirror either, presumably out of shame at his inability to save the woman.
Goodbye.
Joy to him who has understood, delight to those who have listened.
Okay, again from the Havamal.
Sticks and stones will make me groan.
Yeah, I've heard it before. Let me line this shot up.
My claws!
Did you say claws?
I don't need his notes.
Oh, because I don't know I'm going to need them yet. Okay.
It's venting steam. It's just waiting for something. A huge furnace with 83 painted on it.
That is my name, 83.
In Snorri Sturluson's prose Edda, the source of most our knowledge of the Norse mythology, Atri was a dwarf famed for his skill in crafting. He is drawn by Loki into crafting competition against other dwarves, the sons of Ivaldi, after Loki enlists the sons of Ivaldi to forge golden hair to replace the hair that Loki stole from Thor's wife, Sif. The golden hair appears later in Strangeland. Okay, let's listen to the two commentaries.
So I want to talk about machine men, about machines that are human-like, and about human beings who have been made machine-like. I don't mean in terms of prosthesis, I mean in terms of the human mind, the human soul. And I want to come at it by way of a reminiscence from elementary school, where my friends and I used to play a kind of free-form role-playing game. It was really just sort of a narrative, no dice, no paper, narration game. And one day, in I think 7th grade, the King's Quest V had come out, and I'd been playing it over at a friend's house. I didn't have a computer that could run it, and of course really liked the game. One thing that I really liked about adventure games, particularly the Sierra games, is that they kind of felt like you were playing on a computer one of these narration games. And then at school, the friend whose house I'd been over was narrating a narration game with another kid in our class. And as I listened, I realized that he was just narrating King's Quest V. And even, when the other kid would come up with these fairly creative approaches to the puzzles in the game, they would just get shot down because my friend was railroading him into the puzzle solutions provided in the computer game. And so the end result of it was that this computer game that had been designed in some sense to mimic an imagined adventure that you might tell with a friend was now becoming the shackles, the constraints that limited the imaginary adventure that these two friends were sharing. And this is not like a new problem. If you read Samuel Butler's novel Erewhon, there's a line, I can't remember exactly how it goes, but the machines are man-made, but today men are machine-made, that our souls are machine-made souls. And of course, Samuel Butler was writing a long time before King's Quest V came out. But I think there is some real truth in that part of modernity is the regimentation, the organization, the digitization of our lives in the process by which we are transformed from individual beings, Kant would say, ins and ourselves, into just machine parts in a larger machine. And this is something, where my interest in this, ethical, social phenomenon is really complementary with Vic's art style and Vic's passions, because Vic creates machines that look organic, and the organic beings have a kind of mechanical quality to them too. So in his art, he's exploring this hybrid space between man and machine, between living and mechanical. And, that fits the themes of Strangeland really well here. One of the things that the stranger regrets in his life is the extent to which he feels like he's made these sacrifices to conform himself to be a machine man. And in the end, it was all for nothing, because organic life in the form of cancer killed his wife, upset all his plans. That even if you make yourself into a machine, the chaos of organic existence can upset everything that you've sacrificed for. Anyway, 8.3 is sort of a key example of this in the game. So if Primordia is about robots who have human souls, Turing says if we make artificial intelligence, we're not usurping God's role, we're creating new mansions for him to house souls in. And that's what Primordia's robots are. They are real beings. Strangeland is, and one of its themes it's exploring is the degradation of human beings into automata.
Visions and macabre imagery is where I had the most fun on Strangeland, definitely. Doing things like, the vision sequences when the stranger will clutch his head in pain, and then you'll see some grotesqueries, usually of the crustacean variety. I had a ton of fun drawing all the pustules and used a lot of image references of like rotting seafood and stuff like that. I don't know. Ever since I saw my dad sucking the juice out of a crab claw as a kid one time, it was the most revolting thing I'd ever seen. It was like I wanted to bring some of that revulsion into Strangeland. I was pretty happy with the macabre stuff here.
Okay, I feel like this first episode of the commentary has been long enough, so I'm going to save and end it for now. That's all for this one, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!